Throughout history, women's roles in societies and how they are perceived have drastically changed over time. In ancient societies, women were often viewed as property or were given the sole purpose of working the household or bearing and raising children, specifically sons. And it can be difficult when looking at these ancient societies from a Marxist perspective, because not everyone can agree which ancient societies might reflect some capitalistic ideas. But what we do know is that Marxists believe that capitalism and equality across all genders cannot exist at the same time. Capitalism functions most effectively when women are perceived as objects and property, an item that can be sold or traded. When looking back at these ancient times and societies and cultures where the roots of capitalism were beginning to form, we can find that this concept of women being property was very rampant across the same cultures. For example, in ancient Greece and Rome, we can see some of these ideas reflected. For example, in both of these societies, women were seen solely as property. Their singular purpose was to raise children. Women in these ancient societies were unable to vote, unable to own property, and women in Rome actually were required to be owned by a male guardian. Spartan women from Greece, on the other hand, they fought and did train alongside men. They also drank wine, which at the time was an activity most often seen by men. This has always been very interesting because women in the form of goddesses were praised and worshipped in both Greece and Rome. In ancient China as well, there was a similar dynamic where women typically had to belong to a man. Interestingly, if a married woman was widowed, she would then be the property of her eldest son. Marriage was one of the most important events that could happen to a woman in a lot of these ancient societies, aside from providing her husband with a son. Although it was a potentially monumental event for the both of them, it would very rarely affect the bride or wife. In most cases, in these ancient societies, marriage was strictly seen as a political strategy made by the man in charge of both of the families. And due to the political strategies behind children, many children already had their marriages arranged before they were born. This prompted a law that both parties had to be at least 7 years old in order to be married. Fun fact, the term hand in marriage actually dates back to ancient Roman marriages, and will actually refer to the transition of ownership of the woman from father to husband. In ancient Greece, after a woman got married, she would rarely be allowed to interact with any man that is outside of her own family circle. Also, often many women's names were not allowed to be spoken in public. She would also be not allowed to engage in prostitution services due to her vow of faithfulness and loyalty, whereas a husband could engage in these services without any repercussions. Wives in ancient Rome often died before the age of about 20 due to childbirth complications. They were expected to have about 6 children before they turned 20. For many men in ancient Rome, this would actually become a point of pride, was to have a wife with a tombstone that showed that she had died very young, but she had a lot of kids. This also plays into the Marxist perspective, because when you have a lot of kids, and when the sons are deemed the ones that can earn money, make money, and spend money, a woman's societal purpose is to generate these men in the family that can rack in all the money. And in a lot of these ancient cultures, the wife was kind of bound into this relationship with no escape, because divorce was not often widely available. Take China, for example. divorce was only allowed to women under the single circumstance that the husband had to have harmed her family in some way. However, there were other permissible reasons for the husband to divorce his wife, such as failure to bear a son, as the big one, jealousy, unfaithfulness, or even becoming sick or disease. However, if she did not have a family to return to, he would be unable to divorce her. However, on a different note, just to end this in a lighter way, there were a lot of women in ancient societies and cultures that were regarded very well and played extremely important roles in their communities. An example of this would be Egypt, where they had legal rights and were regarded equal to men on every single account. Again, if we're looking back at this from a Marxist feminist perspective, we will see the one area in which that they are not equal would be in occupation, which is where capitalists can play a big part because that's where they earn the money. However, even the education system was very equal. It was very difficult to get education in Egypt, and in order to do so, one had to become a scribe, which took years of dedicated practice. And women were often up to the challenge, and because of this education, they were able to become priests, teachers, and physicians, all of which were well respected. However, if they were uneducated, they would still have the opportunity of employment, such as brewers, sandal weavers, and mistresses of the home. The most important role a woman could have in ancient Egyptian society was called the god's wife of Amun. A god's wife of Amun was a position that was offered to all women, and very early on it was offered to all classes. But as this country progressed, and as some say got more capitalistic, it became less available to all classes and only the upper class. So the position, a god's wife, is essentially assisting the high priest of God, and the god's wife of Amun would be assisting the high priest of God for the god Amun. The god's wife of Amun held the same power as a king. The most widely recognized god's wife of Amun, as well as woman pharaoh, was Hatshepsut. Because of the equal education opportunities, a lot of women of other regions and cities and cultures would travel to Egypt to become educated before returning back. An example of this would be Agnatis. She lived in Greece. She was denied an education there due to her sex. She traveled to Egypt, studied medicine, and returned back to Greece disguised as a man in order to practice. Marriage here in Egypt was also drastically different than the other countries like those discussed previously, because thanks to the legal rights that women had in Egypt. None of their actions required approval or supervision from any man, whether husband or father. There was no arranged marriage of any sort, as well as no stigma around divorce, and no one was required to be a virgin upon being married. In addition to this, abortion and birth control were available to both married and unmarried women very widely. In conclusion, women all over the world in ancient and modern societies face challenges every single day. According to Marxist feminism, many of these challenges can date back to the dawn of capitalism. But regardless, in every society, ancient or modern, women are powerful, strong, and amazing.